Hey everyone, my name is Nigel, and one of the questions that I get asked a lot, not only here on YouTube, but on Instagram and even my Facebook page, is camera recommendations for different budgets and for different purposes. A lot of the times it's really hard for me to recommend a camera unless I know what exactly you're trying to do with the camera, because sometimes what you want to do with the camera can kind of dictate what type of camera you need to go for. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was just to go over some of my favorite 1080p cameras that I've used and kind of go over the pros and cons and what I think they're good for. So I have 5 1080p cameras that I'm going to be talking about, and I've owned all of these and I have a lot of experience with each of these cameras. So these pros and cons are going to be coming from like firsthand experiences with these cameras. I'm going to start from like my least favorite camera down to my favorite 1080p camera that I've had. But keep in mind, I like all of these cameras and I think each of them are good for a different type of filmmaker. So coming in at number 5 is the Canon AOTD. I've done 2 reviews of this camera. I'll link them right up there. But I've talked a lot about this camera and I feel like a lot of people think that I really didn't like it, and that's not really the case. It just wasn't really for me. I think for a YouTube camera, it's actually really good. One of the things that I just had a problem with was finding a small lens that was wide enough that gave me a nice separation between the background. The only one that I could really find that would really work silently, like with the STM motors, is the 24mm f2.8, but that just wasn't wide enough. That was like a 38mm, I think, equivalent field of view. But I really like the AOTD, and some of the pros of that camera is it's got a pretty good codec. I think it's 90 megabits per second in an all-eye codec. It's weather sealed, which is pretty cool. And it's got a headphone jack, and it's got a really well-placed headphone jack. And it's a great first camera, I think, if you're wanting to do YouTube videos, because I really liked learning on Canon cameras. The T2i was like my first DSLR that I ever had. I had, a Canon HV30 and a bunch of other video cameras before the T2i, but like learning on a Canon camera is actually a really good way to go because it's a pretty easy camera to learn on. And with the autofocus of the AOTD, it's really good for YouTube content if you're gonna be moving around or holding stuff up to your lens to do like, product reviews or something like that. So it's a really good first camera for YouTube. The cons is that although the 1080p is good, it's not great. It's not the sharpest 1080p out there, and there's not a lot of assist features. So like there's no focus peaking, and I believe there's no zebras. So coming in at number 4 is actually the camera that I'm filming this on right now. This is the Panasonic GH3. I really love this camera. I think the 1080p out of this camera is actually really good. Some of the pros is that it's got a great codec, it's got a headphone jack, it's got really sharp 1080p, as I mentioned. It's weather sealed, which I really like. It's a great size. So again, I really like the GH3 Canon Rebel size cameras. I think those are like the sweet spot as far as like the size of the body, and it's actually pretty cheap. You can find this camera on eBay for around $300 to $350. So that's a really good deal if you're looking for a camera like this and you need a headphone jack and weather sealing. Some of the cons are there's no assist features, so there's no focus peaking. It has a histogram, but there's no like zebras or anything like that. It's got no flat profile, so there's no like Cinelite D or Vlog or anything like that. It's also got really crappy autofocus. So like I said, with the AOTD, it's really good with autofocus. This GH3 is not good. So you can't really trust this if you're gonna use it for like a YouTube camera. But if you can get past those cons, then this is a really good camera as far as like 1080p cameras go. And that's why I like it so much, because it's weather sealed and it's got really good 1080p video. So yeah, GH3 is really great, and you can use it for a lot of different things. I use it as my YouTube camera and the camera that I do all of my paid work on. So number 3 is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. Now, as far as like 1080p image, I would say this one out of the entire list has the best 1080p image. That's because you can shoot RAW with this camera. So it has an amazing ProRes codec too, a bunch of different flavors of ProRes. It's got a headphone jack. It's pretty compact. It's got the best dynamic range out of all these cameras, which is also cool. It's got many assist features. It's got focus peaking, zebras, all the stuff that you're gonna want in a video camera. Some of the cons is that it's got the worst battery life out of any of the cameras in this list. It's got really bad audio preamps. I've actually talked about this camera too. You can check that out right here, but there's almost a 3 times crop factor in this camera. So any lens that you put on it, you need to times the focal length by 3, and that's like the field of view that you're gonna get. So that's kind of bad. It's not weather sealed, and there's no 60p. Now just keep in mind that other than this camera, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema, every other camera in this list can shoot 1080 60p, but you do have to note that with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema, there is no 60p period, not even in 720. So coming in at number 2 is the Sony A6000. And I've done a video review of this one as well, but this one is also a really good YouTube camera if you can get over the fact that there's no flippy screen, but it's got a great 1080p image. It's really good in low light. It's got great autofocus. So like I said, you could use this for a YouTube camera. You're just gonna have to, trust the autofocus in this camera, which I think you can. There's great lens options for this. I really think that Sigma has created a really nice lens kit. You have the Sigma 16mm, the 30mm, and I believe the 56mm. So that kind of covers like your wide, mid, and your telephoto range. And all those lenses are amazing. The 60mm for sure would be the lens that I would pick if I wanted to do YouTube videos, because it's a really nice wide field of view and it's f1.4, so you can get a really nice blurred out background. But some of the cons are there's no flip up screen or flip around screen, so you can't see yourself while you're shooting if you're going to do YouTube type content like this. There's no headphone or mic jack. There's no flat profile. It overheats occasionally. It just depends on what type of shooting you do. So like super long interview type shots, it might overheat. It's not weather sealed at all, so that's another con if you're going to be shooting in like kind of harsh conditions. And the battery life isn't that great. So those are just the things that you're going to have to take into consideration if you want to be looking at the Sony A6000 for like a YouTube camera. But I think as like a run and gun gimbal type camera, the Sony A6000 is great. And again, if you can afford picking up that Sigma 16mm f1.4, that's like so good on that camera. So my number one pick, and this is probably my favorite 1080p camera, and I've talked about this camera a lot, but it's the Panasonic G6. To be honest, I actually like the image from the Panasonic G6 more than a Panasonic GH3, but the GH3 has things that the Panasonic G6 doesn't. But the G6 is great. Some of the pros is that it's really cheap. You can get it for around $200 to $300. I wouldn't spend more than $300 on a G6. Like I've seen them on eBay for like 150 to like 250 bucks. So I'd kind of stay in that range if you're looking for this camera. You're definitely gonna have to look for this camera used, obviously, like with most of the cameras in this list, except for maybe like the AOTD and the A6000. It's got great 1080p. I really like the 1080p image out of that camera. It's got focus peaking, it's got zebras, and it's got great audio preamps. Granted, you film in AVC HD. Which brings us to our cons. I like filming in AVC HD the most because the audio in AVC HD is a lot better. You can film in MP4, but you're gonna lose like audio quality. So I usually film in AVC HD, which isn't the best codec, especially if you're using Max. I think it's only like a 28 megabit per second codec or something like that. So not a super high codec, but still really good. There's no weather sealing, there's no headphone jack, and there is no flat profile, which a lot of those things like the flat profile and the headphone jack, a lot of people can probably live without. I definitely think that it's worth it to have a headphone jack in your camera, just especially if you're doing like paid stuff, because if your audio messes up, you really want to make sure you catch that before you film an entire day of video with really bad audio coming into your camera. So yeah, it all just kind of depends on like what you plan on doing. Like the Blackmagic pocket cinema camera is definitely more for like short films, and if you want to like really tweak the colors in your video a lot. I would say the AOTD is better for like a YouTube type person because it has like great autofocus. The Sony A6000 is a great like gimbal camera, and the G6 and the GH3 are just kind of like those in-between cameras where they can do both of those things. Like you can put a GH3 or G6 on a gimbal, or you can shoot short films with any of these cameras, but it all just depends on like what you want to sacrifice. So for me, and the reason why I use like the GH3 for example, is because I just know it really well and I know how to make it look the best. But anyways, I hope that kind of helped. I get a lot of questions all the time about like what camera I'd recommend, and if this one's good, if that one's good. And I just kind of wanted to, share cameras that I talk about the most on my channel over the past year, and just, tell you what I like and don't like about all of them. So, but anyways, if you liked this video and you found it helpful, it'd be great if you hit the like button. You can check the description to see a list of all the gear that I currently use, all the stuff that I use to make these YouTube videos. You can click over here if you want to check out any of my other videos. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Bye.